Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our DVT Insights session. We're just letting all folks join us in from the waiting room at the moment. I'm sure they will all be here within the next minute or two before we get going. And we've given about a minute or two, so that's all great. Just checking. And there we go. Folks are in and running. Again, good morning. I'm Carl Fisher. I'm the CMO for DVT. Welcome to the session today where we have Roberto, our head of the Innovation Center. Roberto leads activity at DVT in terms of leading and emerging technologies and how those might be applied in a business context. The typical thing that DVT does, find opportunity in technology, show organizations how you can get value out of that, and then practically deliver on that. Roberto, thank you so much for joining us today and leading the session on NFTs. I know that I'm certainly looking forward to it and understanding a lot more about it than it just being something about pretty pictures, yeah?
Yes, hi, Carl. Thank you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. So hi, everyone. My name is Roberto. I'm the innovation lead, as Carl said. And yes, I've spent the past few months dabbling in new technologies, seeing, technically what they mean, what it means for the business, and how we should start structuring these things and putting these things together. And that's what today's talk's about. It's about NFTs and what it means for your business. So let's take it away.
Fantastic. Roberto, just let me
Yes.
interrupt you just for a moment while you get that up and running.
Sure.
For our audience today, typical session that we run, Roberto will be talking to you and covering the topic over the next 40 minutes or so. If you have any questions, please do log those in the chat window. I will moderate those questions and pose those to Roberto either during the session where they're relevant or alternatively at the end when we have a Q&A session to end off today's session. And with that, let's leave it to Roberto to tell us more about NFTs.
Okay. Carl, everything good on your side? You can see the screen. Happy?
Perfect, Roberto.
Okay, cool. Brilliant. All right. Okay, everybody. So on today's agenda, very simple. What is an NFT? I think as a business person or even, somebody who isn't in the technology space, to understand what an NFT is very important. From there, I'm going to talk about value propositions of NFTs. And it talks more to the business side of things. And then from there, I'm going to talk about use cases. I can list all the value propositions, but people are a lot more textile. They want to see examples of how the dots connect together. We'll start off with some really concrete use cases and then work our way down to, what the future might pose with various use cases. And then I'll open the floor for some questions. Okay, so what is an NFT? Well, how it normally starts and how I started was saying, well, what does NFT stand for? And if you go and Google that, it's going to tell you it's a non-fungible token. And when you see this, you're going to be a little bit perplexed as to what on earth fungible means. And so the next question is, well, what is fungible? And fungible is something that holds value, but it has the property such that you can exchange it. So what does that mean? If I have R1 and I want to swap you R1 for R1, they have the same value. They're exactly the same. So it's something that holds value, but it also holds the property of being interchangeable, right? Something that is non-fungible is something that holds value, but because of its content or what it represents, it's not easily transferable or interchangeable. So if I have a painting that's worth a lot of money or not a lot of money, I can't just simply swap one painting for the other. The contents of the painting might be very different. They could both be paintings, but despite that, the values that they hold may differ. And so it's something that's not fungible is you can't interchangeably transfer it. So that's what non-fungible means. Then the next question is, what is a non-fungible token? What is the definition? And I got this straight off the internet. You cannot make this any better. It's a perfect definition. And it basically says it's a record on a blockchain, which is associated with a particular digital or physical asset. And you're now a little bit confused because every time you've opened Google, an NFT is a record. Every time you've opened Google, it's normally a picture. That's what we've come to know as NFTs as. So how is it a record, and what is the difference between this record and this whole concept of it being an image? And well, to be very honest, this is what it is. This is what that record looks like. So this is actually an NFT. It's a little bit peculiar looking for now, but we'll break that down very shortly. But before we do that, I just want to paint a picture for people who aren't in the crypto space. This is a wallet. One of the most popular wallets on the internet is MetaMask, and inside this wallet is an address, a crypto address. And a crypto address looks like this. So it's a really long thing, but it's an address that's will store your Ethereum, your Bitcoins, depending on which network you're on. But this is typically what a crypto wallet address looks like. And going back to the whole NFT thing, we're going to start explaining what an NFT is from this sort of from here. And I'm going to start with the number itself. So what is this number? This is an example of a smart contract, and this is as technical as a session will get. All it is a number, right? And we call this number a token, and this is a token ID, okay? And what we do is we actually say, hey, on the blockchain, Mr. Blockchain, take this number, this token ID that you see on the left there, take the person, this address, and save that to the blockchain. And on the blockchain, that's what actually ends up happening. They'll say that this particular address, this wallet owns this number. Okay, but that's not good enough, right? Owning a number that's on a blockchain, there's got to be something a little bit more to this. And so I'm going to talk about the other side of the record that gets saved, because this also gets saved into the blockchain. And if you look at this, you would think, okay, well, I mean, I know NFTs are images, or digital content. This must be that. This must be the image. And if you thought that, it might be a good guess, but it's actually not. What that URL actually is a piece of metadata. And this metadata is used to describe the content. So if you can see it on your side, you'll see that this piece of metadata has a background. It's got a cape. It's got arms that are orange, legs that are red, so on and so forth. So what this number does is it points to a piece of metadata, okay? And inside that metadata is a property called image, okay? And that image is actually the image that you would normally see on websites like OpenSea. Okay. Now you also got to start thinking. So as a technical person, I said, okay, well, there's this number that points to a URL, but what happens if somebody on the server changes this metadata? If I have an image that's worth 6 million Rand, or this metadata that points to an image that has 6 million Rand, and somebody, in a centralized system changes this, like what happens if I change the URL, right? And this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. And that's why there's always been, doing digital collections and stuff like that's very tricky, because it's always been centralized, so anybody can fiddle with stuff. So like I said earlier, here's this image, of the piñata. If I remove the image from the server and you go back to that URL, it's gone, okay, which is a little bit problematic for you. And what we actually do, and it's not 100% accurate what I'm going to say, but it's good enough for the purposes of this call. What we actually do is we use this concept of a CID, which is a content identifier. So what we do is we take your image and we hash it, okay? And whenever you hash a certain image, it's going to spit out the same sorts of results. We take the image, we break it down, we take the metadata, we break it down, we hash it through a certain algorithm, and it always spits out the exact same thing every time you put in that image through the algorithm. If you change it ever so slightly, the algorithm will spit something else out differently, okay? And that's what that is over there. So what you do is it's your CID, and we take it, we hash it, and that over there uniquely represents that piece of data. Any change to that, anything outside of that, that there is what represents. That's how we know you own that piece of data. So if everything exploded and everything left the world and you said, I own this, and we said, well, prove it. We take this thing, we hash it, and we check the blockchain. We can actually say for certain that you do own it. So that's the one part. The next question is, so, okay, cool. We can verify that this is over there. Okay. And if somebody changes stuff, we can use these CIDs to try and find it. But what happens if the server goes down? So if I have a centralized server, and the CID is there and the server goes away forever, how will I ever access this again? You can prove that you own the content, but it's technically off the internet. And what we actually do then is you're used to something on the left, which is, a good old centralized system, and it sits there and it's just, a single server. There's this new thing called IPFS, which is the interplanetary file system. And what happens is that we put your metadata on there, we put the image on there, and it gets distributed across this network. And whenever it gets distributed across the network, you'll see something like this. And you can see there for the particular image I showed you earlier, there's at least 2 storage providers. IPFS has different mechanisms to know how to distribute it around the network. But you can always see for any given image, there's always at least 2 different two different storage providers that are containing this metadata, containing the image. So that's how it currently works. You'll see that the other one's got a little bit more, and that's just based on different stuff and how often the image gets accessed and stuff like that. And so now so in summary, this is a record and this is technically an NFT. We found ways to assert that you do own a certain piece of digital content, and we found ways to keep it alive forever, distributed across this network. And that's now what has given rise to NFTs. So if anybody asks you at the bar in December what an NFT is, you're going to tell them it's a number that points to a URL that uniquely represents the piece of data. And technically, that's pretty much what it is. So that's the intuition behind an NFT. Moving forward, well, what are the value propositions of this? Okay, cool. So we can do all this stuff with the technology, but what does this mean for my business? What does this mean going forward, right? One of the biggest value propositions of NFTs is brand engagement. Think of it, if you're in marketing, think of it as a new channel, you know. There's a lot of juice to be squeezed from a brand engagement perspective, and the case studies below will really show that. Because of the way these NFTs sit on the blockchain and the way blockchains move value and cryptocurrencies around, you really can get some good strategies for getting ongoing revenue streams. So before, as you'll see in examples, you know, in a physical world where something was sold, you know, subsequent purchases of that, you know, the seller or the creator couldn't actually get these royalties. Now they can in a lot more automated sorts of ways using smart contracts. It helps curb counterfeiting, and we'll see some examples around that. And it helps assert ownership. So things like theft, it might really might start curbing those sorts of things as well. Because NFTs sit on blockchains, there are some value propositions that blockchains themselves bring. And so one of those is an efficient transfer of value. So my gosh, we take for granted how difficult it is sometimes to make payments, what happens in the background, all the security, the measures, all that sort of stuff, and how that gets put together. Efficient value transfer is a really big deal. Being able to both clear and settle a payment within a couple of seconds, is something to be admired about blockchain technology. Because of the way the smart contracts are created, we now get this new level of integration and interoperability. So the ability to talk to these smart contracts, and depending on how the smart contract is written and the security measures around it, it's actually a lot easier to access certain pieces of code on the blockchain. Whereas before you needed API keys, you needed to do all these checks and all of that sort of jazz. That kind of falls away now, and your smart contracts almost act like autonomous micro APIs, so to say. In general, it does reduce development, infrastructure, and back office costs. So from a development perspective, creating a smart contract is admittedly fairly simple. It's not that difficult or convoluted. You obviously have to have your wits about you from a security perspective. But I mean, other than that, it's actually fairly straightforward, in my opinion, on how to do stuff. With infrastructure costs, the blockchain runs the smart contract. So therefore, you don't need servers to run certain stuff. So there's a cost saving from there. And then because of all these other intrinsic things that blockchains bring together, so curbing of fraud, having certain security measures in place and all that sort of stuff, you can save costs on back office. And you'll see some things that highlight that there. And then time to market. So if you've just got less things to do and less boxes to tick, you can get to market a lot quicker. Okay, cool. Use cases. There's normally the usual general use case about digital art, but I think that have been flogged to the nth degree. So we're going to talk about collectibles, probably the most tangible one thus far that isn't digital art. For some strange reason, the humans have collected many things over time, from stamps to comic books, to very peculiar things. I Googled why people collect things. It ranged from enjoyment to mental disorders, but they do collect things, as can be seen here. But some of these things really do own or do hold a lot of value. I mean, somebody spent almost 2 million Rand on a set of Pokemon cards. So despite it's a thing and it happens, and it's something worth paying attention to, given the value that does move around with collections. As we saw growing up, you had all these soccer cards, and it's almost the next phase of things to come is that, if I had a physical collection, a physical collectible, it would make sense to have a digital collectible, right? The problem with digital collectibles is, let's take with the Soccer World Cup coming up, is this card of Cristiano Ronaldo, is it real or fake? How do I know that Carl, for example, does really own this? How do I know it's not a forgery? Because in the digital landscape, you can download, save it, pretend to have it, run a really well put together scam. It's almost impossible to assert whether Carl owns this, okay? And that's the biggest issue we face with digital collectibles going forward, right? Ironically, in the physical space, there is a huge business in verifying whether something is genuine or not. So forgery happens there, okay? Because there's obviously upside. So you can see over here, some trading cards or certain items go for over $10,000. Okay, to verify the legitimacy of this is extremely expensive. It's $600 a card. So proving something is genuine and authentic is an expensive endeavor, and it's a very tricky endeavor because of all the forgery. But with blockchains, they actually fix this. So it helps mitigate digital forgery, right? Because as we said earlier, we can take this piece of content, we can hash it, we'll get a unique value that represents this. And if we take this and save it on the blockchain to your address, we know for certain that you own this. Because blockchains are tamper-proof, it's a little bit, in a centralized system, somebody can just go and change the database, right? Because blockchains are tamper-proof, we know for certain that you do own this card of Cristiano Ronaldo. What's something that's also important is that we can just ask the blockchain, hey, does Carl own this card, right? Is he the actual owner that he claims to be, right? And the blockchain will just return you an answer saying, yep, token 0, this is the owner, this, and then there's a bunch of other methods we can use and say, yep, Carl does actually own this card. What is cool about this sort of technology is it scales. So when you are tied to physical items, I can't sell my car to someone in Japan. Well, I could. It's just be extremely expensive and cumbersome to do that. Because these sorts of NFTs sit onto the blockchain, payments and transfers are infinitely easier to pull off. So going digital with a digital collection makes a lot of sense, right? And it does make a lot of sense. The World Cup's starting on Sunday, right? And FIFA's joined the club. They know for a fact that there's a lot of hardcore fans out there. They know fans love to collect memorabilia, and now their fans can collect memories. There are certain goals that have happened in history that have been extremely memorable. Certain events that have occurred that people want to own, and they want to say that they own that piece of digital content, right? They want to own the record. They want to own the NFT, because that's what it means to own the NFT, is to own the record. And for them, they want to collect these sorts of things. FIFA's got a whole bunch of mechanics and mechanisms in there. There's different types of categories. So some are rare, some are epic. You see this one up here, a goal by Mbappe going for like 50,000 Rand. So it's become a thing, and companies have realized that people like to collect things, and so they're using the technology to do the to so that people collect these sorts of moments. One of the biggest pioneers that actually started this out was the NBA Top Shots. NBA, probably in the sporting space, one of the first to really come out and start pushing the ball forward and saying, hey, let's do this collectibles thing. And it's worked out quite well for them. There's a lot of movement on that. You can see some of the prices there that some of these things go for. In short, if it's LeBron James, it's just going for a huge chunk of money. So yeah, but collectibles do exist, and there are companies, you're tapping into those sorts of markets. The next most important thing is when you structure these marketplaces inside the smart contract, you can take a royalty of 2%, whichever percentage you like, whereas before you couldn't. So if I had a physical card and I sold it to, say, Karen on the call, if she sold that card to somebody else, I lose out on that sale as the creator. But with this, because I own the contract that governs, the rules and how to trade and, allows for the verification and all that sort of stuff, I can actually charge royalties. And a lot of companies also tapping into this whole royalty concept that come with NFTs. But who knows, in the future, we maybe might get Kaiser Chiefs, Orlando Pirates NFTs. It could also, fit into rugby. But I did also notice from the rugby side is a lot of companies might actually tap into this. So maybe Celsius says, hey, or Emirates says, hey, this is another branding opportunity to engage more people, to get the NFTs of a particular game or of a particular tribe. So there really is some, brand engagement here further for these companies if they wanted to dive into, using sports people who love to collect stuff and their brand as well. Okay, and that's collectibles, ladies and gentlemen. The next use case will be competitions and promotions. 10 years ago, time went extremely quickly. But 10 years ago, when I was at university, there was the Mzansi Millions Monopoly game in South Africa. And there was quite a buzz at that stage. I remember, and there was also a lot of prize money. So, it was about 38 million rands worth of prize money. And it was actually, a fun game. You'd go, you'd buy stuff, you'd end up getting these sorts of tokens. Here's an example of it. McDonald's ran this worldwide, by the way. So it wasn't just in South Africa, it was a worldwide thing. And you got these sorts of, you got these tokens. And from here, you could go, if you redeem certain stuff, if you collected X amount of tokens, you could redeem that for bigger prizes and so on and so forth. Right. Ironically, which matched perfectly with this presentation, was that wherever there's people, unfortunately, there's fraud. And in this particular case, there was so much fraud that there was a documentary made about it. There was about 12 years worth of fraud that happened with McDonald's. And you guys can go online and read about it. And ironically, there was crime families involved. Ben Affleck was going to make a movie. It was fire. But unfortunately, in these sorts of promotions, something that's supposed to build the brand, it actually ends up hurting the brand. Nobody wants to have a campaign that's shrouded in fraud and corruption, right? So yeah, it was a phenomenal concept, and at the time we loved it. But trying to keep something like this that has a lot of value and trying to own those segments where that value is transmitted along a chain is extremely difficult to do, and it's expensive, And so, yeah, I mean, the costs incurred in putting something up like this, you've got to put counterfeit, measures in place. So it's very easy to go and create one of these, and fake it. You've got to put verification processes in place. The biggest pain is going to be reconciliation. So people have redeemed these sorts of things. Are the numbers adding up, right? Which token was redeemed where? That sort of manual process and trying to add those numbers up. And if there's a hole, where's the hole going? It's expensive to do this. You've got to put your fraud and security measures in place. And then if things do go badly, there's investigations, there's lawsuits, there's PR announcements and damage control. No CEO wants this, or marketing person. But blockchains really can come and help here. So with the blockchains, you get the counterfeit verification and reconciliation process for free. The smart contract keeps track of all the money, all the movements of stuff, where everything went. You can go to the blockchain and verify everything, which token came in, which token, how much money was released, so on and so forth. As you saw earlier, it was somebody inside McDonald's that caused the issues. With smart contracts, once the contract is being created and pushed, and once anything's put on the blockchain, you cannot change it. So whereas before somebody actually did tamper with the systems, now it's a lot more difficult to pull that off. So you obviously have reduced fraud. And then, blockchain sorts out your payments, sorts out all the NFT sort of logic and stuff like that in the smart contract. There's fewer hurdles, and so you can get to market a lot quicker. What's also nice about this is the blockchain does remember everything. So prosecution might become a lot easier, because whenever these sorts of fraud cases do happen, the next question is, well, where's the money? Where's it going? What's happening? But because the blockchain remembers everything, it definitely does help in those sorts of things. So it might curb theft because people know there's a higher likelihood of being caught. Okay, NFTs. Well, as before with all the other stuff, you can collect, transfer, and redeem with ease. There are no issues with this. The smart contract takes care of all the heavy lifting for you. There can also be royalties. So if these companies were very clever, because it's on the internet, it's on the blockchain and accessible via like smart devices, you can really get clever with how you do your NFT mechanics, which I suspect is what they'll call it. Further down the line is that, I can release certain tokens in Cape Town and release certain tokens in Joburg. and the Joburg people need a token that's in Cape Town, and Cape Townians can post this on a marketplace for a certain amount, or they can trade it for something else. And you can see that engagement now crossing geographies, which is awesome for a brand. What they can also do is, and what did happen, back in the day with McDonald's, was people started to sell their tokens, and every time they sold their tokens for 50 Rand or 20 Rand or however, how much money they want, 2,000 Rand in some cases, McDonald's can take a royalty for all these sorts of things that happen on their marketplace, right? So if they structure the mechanics well enough, they can really cross geographies and get a real juice out of, get some juice out of that squeeze. Two final points to make here is, I can give you an NFT that after a certain amount of time becomes unlockable, right? So I can say, hey, and what's cool about this is it could mean future sales. So that's also cool. It's engagement for the future, and it's also future sales. And then I think it's fairly obvious from here, this could feed into sorts of, into loyalty initiatives. Textbooks, isn't that peculiar? Non-fungible tokens in textbooks, and it'll make perfect sense. Why? So Pearson wants to start selling his textbooks as NFTs, because in the textbook space, that secondhand market, it's absolutely huge. And it really does take a chunk out of that first-hand market. People are always selling their secondhand textbooks. And if you're a university student and there's a 2,000 Rand textbook that you own, selling it is in your best interest, right? But the problem that Pearson's always had is they couldn't get into that secondhand market. Being able to tap into that secondhand market was difficult for them. They could do it from a physical textbook, but with digital stuff and all the forgery that goes around and the pirating, it's a little bit more difficult. And what they plan to do is use NFTs for this, right? Why? Because, textbooks hold value, because that's the point of a non-fungible token. It holds value, right? They can write the smart contracts that govern the digital supply of these textbooks. So for a certain edition, there's only so much supplied. And the new edition comes out, they can supply other tokens for that, and they can actually manage that whole economy because they are a really big player. And so the supply and demand of all these tokens they can manage. They can also manage all the pricing of it. And most importantly, if they build that marketplace and they get the mechanics of the NFTs done right and the supply and demand of all these sorts of things, they can now actually tap into the secondhand book market, which before they couldn't. So if I bought my book and it was digital, it just pretty much sat. And I couldn't do anything with it. Thereafter, if I do want to get rid of the textbook, I can now put it on their marketplace and I can still get some money out of it. And with everything going digital, this is really good for Pearson to get a chunk of that secondhand textbook market. So yeah, that's how it's doing the rounds. For textbooks. Social media, last week this became a really big thing, or last week or 2 weeks ago. Instagram's obviously moving into the creator space and trying to do stuff like OpenSea, and say to creators, hey, put your stuff on our networks, and let's get some of your artwork sold. And it's a no-brainer. This is how Mark Zuckerberg makes a couple billion fairly easily, because Instagram has a massive distribution network. They can charge fees per transaction. They can do a percentage of royalties, of all the other artworks and transactions. But a more interesting question to ask here is, are they going to start doing promotions for companies like we saw earlier? Is McDonald's going to go to Instagram and say, hey, you guys run the promotion, right? You've got the whole infrastructure. You guys have got the distribution network. You guys run it and take a pinch off of that, right? Is Instagram going to start doing collectibles for companies? It's interesting questions to ask, and it's interesting questions to ask for your business. Should we be thinking along these lines with Instagram making all these movements? The final use case, and I think a really cool use case, is luxury goods and physical items, right? At this stage, for a luxury good, especially bags, the secondhand market once again is booming. It's doing really, really well. And people, and some of these bags are in high demand. There's waiting lists, all sorts of things. And because there are waiting lists in the first-hand market, the second-hand market then starts to boom, right? Because they've tweaked the first-hand markets, right? So there's a lot of juice to be squeezed from second-hand luxury good markets. But is this real or is it fake? I mean, this person straight out of Benoni claims that they can show you the receipt and the proof of purchase. Everything in this entire transaction could be faked. And it's not for a small amount of money neither. It is going for 29,000 Rand, but everything here has no like basis or credibility backing it. You can fake a proof of purchase, you can fake receipts, and the entire bag could be a 200 Rand bag from Chinatown. So these sorts of things in a market that should be thriving secondhand becomes problematic. As a person who maybe wants to engage with Louis Vuitton, how do I know if this is legitimate or not, right? I end up having to go to some other third party who then, charges me stupid amounts of money as well, to take their cut and all of that jazz. But in secondhand markets, these sorts of markets are really flooded with counterfeit stuff, and it hurts them. Luxury brands lose a heck of a lot of money, and this was in 2017 to counterfeiting. So it really does hurt their business. But what they have actually what they've come to do is that they've all joined up. And they've created their own blockchain, the Aurora blockchain, right? To try and help fix and curb these sorts of things. There are two use cases. We'll talk more about the counterfeiting use case more than anything else in this particular presentation. But, they've come together to make their own blockchain to fix their own problems. What I suspect will happen in the future, if not already happening for some of them, is they'll make use of these authentication NFC tags. So every time you tag something that's, sewn into the bag, there's this code that changes, that goes to the system. But what you can do is each bag is technically tagged and it's just secured with this new NFC authentication system, but that tag represents the bag, and that can be placed as an NFT on a blockchain, right? Which is very important. You can see from the Facebook example, if I did want to buy this bag from the person, you're living in South Africa. So, you as the seller are worried about EFTs not working out. So what you do is, you say, hey, can you get cash? Getting 30,000 Rands worth of cash is not easy. And it's also high risk for everybody involved in this sort of transaction. Well, what Louis Vuitton can do is they can make a smart contract and they can facilitate these P2P transactions, right? Because of the properties of blockchains and NFTs, they can curb theft. But what's more important here, because they have this digital representation of this physical asset, they can start taking a cut of all those sorts of secondhand market purchases. So it's not just on the first-hand market sale, it's now on the second-hand market sales and subsequent sales after that. You'll also find that a lot of these bags appreciate in value. So they might start making more money, because the actual value of the bag increases, which is a big deal for them. And it does fix a lot of problems, from a peer-to-peer perspective, and from a branding sort of perspective. It really just does streamline that second-hand market quite well. But I think the biggest thing is going to be this. For the first time ever, you can actually take your physical item and show it off to the world and verify that you do own it. And I think there's a lot of juice to be squeezed out of that. Actually being able to assert that you own the bag is, I think, a big thing for luxury brands or any sort of brand going forward, especially if it's high value. Before, anybody could take a picture and pretend to have a Louis Vuitton bag. Now you can actually prove it. And then there could even be revenue models there for luxury brands saying, if you want to prove that you own this bag, we'll charge you, like Elon wants to charge you $8 a month, So I think in the future, we're going to start seeing our devices, being verified and appearing on social media. So some questions, will Instagram hook into the smart contracts and do the P2P payments themselves? Will they go to this blockchain and say, hey, let us hook into that? Will Louis Vuitton charge them to interact with their smart contract, or will Louis Vuitton just do it themselves? Probably the latter. Yeah. But you can take this concept that's happening from luxury goods and probably move it through to technical items, right? Which are high theft sorts of items. So future questions, will there be like an Apple blockchain, that helps do these P2P payments? Will Apple start charging people for the second-hand market and the transfer of these phones, and in so doing curb theft? Insurance companies, this is a very big deal. So insurers have no provenance of an item. So if I buy a Louis Vuitton bag, I can absolutely fake all the invoices, everything. I can pay for an item that doesn't actually exist. And from there, and then that's how false insurance claims happen. So I pretend I have this item, I pay for it, I Photoshop all the invoices. 6 months later, I say, oh, look, my 30,000 Rand bag was stolen, please pay me out. And that does affect the insurance companies a lot. Yes. So, if you have all these physical items that are representative as NFTs on these blockchains, the insurance can get a good line of sight of who's owned this, where it was bought, how much it was bought for, what is the value, more importantly. So this art piece that I claim is 200,000 Rand was actually bought for 10,000 Rand. Before, keeping track of all those sorts of transactions wasn't possible to do. And I'm sure insurers probably suffer more fraud than they can count. So I actually think blockchains and NFTs or physical items for the insurance industry will be a real game changer. But the next important question to ask is, if there is an Apple blockchain, are they going to charge the insurers to access this information? Well, there's upside for Apple, right? They get money from second-hand sales, and they can also get money from insurers. If you're an insurer, if that information costs you 100 million, but it saves you 400 million in counterfeit or false claims, you're actually quite happy with that sort of deal, because technically you're saving money at the end of the day. So it's interesting to see how the future will unfold. Future questions. This could hurt the insurance market. If theft is really curbed, and if I steal a certain physical item, but I don't own the NFT on the blockchain and I try and sell it, you might actually be able to choke theft in its entirety. The only time theft might live is if I steal your bag because I want your bag. But with everything being represented on a blockchain, I know for a fact that you still don't own it. So it might actually hurt the insurance market. We'll see how everything plays out in the future going forward. But it's important to think about these things. Is it a win or is it not a win, right? Is it something that helps our industry, or is it something that doesn't help our industry? Hence the purpose of the presentation. This is also a very good question to ask. Like, what does regulations mean? So if I'm the CEO of an insurance company and this technology really starts to pick up, will this affect our business in the future? If the South African government says, hi, if you want to engage in any second-hand purchases, it has to be done on, using blockchain and NFT technology, and these are the blockchains we support, and so on and so forth. And they go to guys like Facebook Marketplace, and they go to Gumtree, and they say, you have to do it like this. If you don't, we have a problem. And if with society moving away from cash more and more into the digital sort of sphere, you might actually find regulations like this cropping up. And you need to start saying, well, if we're building a business, what does the next 20 years or 30 years look like? This could be something that might be really good for your business or might be really bad. Only time will tell, but I think it's still good to start thinking along those sorts of lines when building towards the future. And the future is coming. As much as there's been some concerns around cryptocurrencies, and valid concerns, and concerns about NFTs, and there's been a lot of hype, as there is with every technology. Even the internet had its hype, even the bubbles burst there. But the technology still remains, because it does still add value. What the blockchain technology and NFTs do is it really does change big fundamental things and fundamental systems. And so its integration into our day-to-day lives, as with any technology that does these sorts of big things, will take time. But it is coming. So if someone like MasterCard does start implementing this sort of stuff, it's a big deal, If they allow for you to pay for your cryptocurrencies, and they help brands manage those NFTs, so maybe Instagram doesn't do the promotions, but maybe MasterCard starts to do it, and they charge them, the merchants a fee, that could be a big deal, So I'd rather prepare for the future than wait for it to happen. But yeah, this is a recent article, also not more than a month old, of one of the executives at MasterCard saying very soon you might be able to tap to pay using digital currency, cryptocurrencies, and therefore it will affect NFTs and all that sort of jazz. So yeah, I'm going to do an Uno reverse card, and generally what happens is people ask me questions, all right? But now I've got questions for you, and they're actually really important questions. So is your business ready? If you're an executive in one of these companies, is there something you could take advantage of with collectibles? Your promotion strategy, what does that look like in the future? How should it look like? All these sorts of things. If you have a physical goods company and you're selling certain items, computers or whichever, what does NFTs mean for that? How does theft affect your business? Is actually preventing theft good for your business? Some people might view it otherwise. Maybe it is good for their business. Or tapping into second-hand markets, does your business lose a fair amount of money from reoccurring sales in a second-hand market that you actually never get to touch because it's all physical? Being able to leverage NFTs, to fix other problems that NFTs solve could mean revenue streams for your business going forward. So the big question is your business ready? Do you understand the technology? Do you know where its value lies and what problems it fixes? Do you know what it can and can't do? Do you have a strategy and plan to leverage this technology? So as said before, I think any person in a very big business, it takes time. It could take a year of just flat out planning to try and see the best ways to derive value from the technology. So it's always important to start these discussions sooner rather than later, because the last thing you want to do as a business is get caught on the back foot. The last thing you want to do is miss an opportunity because you weren't paying attention. And so that's pretty much the fundamentals here. Always be on top of the ball. Because if MasterCard does flick a switch, and if MasterCard does start to do stuff, or if Instagram and these big tech companies do start to move, is your business ready? And you want to take advantage of that opportunity, because once the opportunity is gone, it's very difficult to fight your way back out of that. You can always get money again, but you can't get opportunities again. So as a business, always be on top of the curve, always be, willing to experiment and dabble. And as time progresses, I do believe, using this technology, your companies will prosper from it. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining the call. I think Carl almost just right on time. Yeah. I don't know if there's any questions for me at all, but that Perfect, is Roberto. NFTs. It's value you can get from them, and some practical use cases where they can really shine. Thank you.
Fantastic. To our audience, if you do have any questions, again, please just log those in the chat window and we'll pick those up quickly. We do have some 10 to 15 minutes in order to answer anything specific that you have. While you might be thinking of your question, Roberto, perhaps I'll just pose one to you quickly. Sure. You kind of led into your question set with is your business ready? What would you go into to kind of go, your business is ready if? What would the answer to that be?
Putting me on the spot there, Con. Good question. It would depend. I think you'd have to see exactly. So if there's, some low-hanging fruit, like, is there any sort of counterfeiting in your business, and can you use NFTs to start counterfeiting that, right? Understanding secondhand markets. So how often is my stuff being sold? Can we make that easier? Can we make that P2P payments process easier? And this varies a lot from business to business. So if I'm a bank it's a B2B2C, right? So they care about their customers and what problems they can solve for that. So if you're say, I don't know, Standard Bank dealing with micro merchants, can we put these promotions for micro merchants and make like really cheap, promotions for them? As Standard Bank doing, maybe talk to MasterCard and wait, because maybe MasterCard figures it out. There's a lot of permutations to that question, and it'll be definitely a case-by-case sort of basis. I think the best thing you can do is understand the technology, and then it'll be a case-by-case thing. Each business would have to see, from an insurer's perspective, is it a race to see who makes the first blockchain that does this sort of stuff, and those insurers can sell it to other companies, because it fixes problems on their side, so they want to get there first, but it really is a case-by-case thing. To know when you're ready is a very tricky thing to answer.
That's why we like to put you on the spot, Roberto, because you come up with a decent answer to a difficult question anyway. And I guess that is the case. We're talking about tech that is relatively new in terms of its application, at least in terms of the momentum that's building behind the use of things like NFTs, and folks are exploring that and kind of getting there. So that probably leads me to my second question is, it's one thing to kind of start going, these are the questions around and perhaps the statuses of when you might be ready. But what's the suggested kickoff point? Where do people go practically to go, well, if you're going to explore this and you're going to try out the tech, where would you point people to just begin that journey?
Carl, so I think the biased answers, you come to our innovation center, obviously.
Yes, good answer.
The second, so if I had to give anybody sorts of guidance, just follow the leaders. So go look at OpenSea. They're really big. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. And go see, at least from a digital arts perspective and a collectibles perspective, start looking in those sorts of directions. To start seeing and dabbling. I mean, if I was any sort of company, I'd run it like a startup, so have an hypothesis, say, okay, cool, we believe collectibles will be good for our business. What's the least amount that we can put in to test this, to see if it's worth the ROI behind this, right? And then you can have like marketing campaigns that maybe piggyback off of other, platforms like an OpenSea and so on and so forth. So I'd probably take it and approach it from that perspective, to test the market, to see. And then a lot of these things, it's also about timing. So it doesn't work today, but tomorrow it might work. So it is very much a touch and go. But it's some sort of level of experimentation, getting a bunch of your best and brightest into a room and saying, okay, cool, what problems can this solve? And probably take it from that sort of approach. Once again, it's a very broad question, and what I advise to clients X and client Y might be very different. So yeah, it's not a one shoe fits all. But if I had to advise anything, go to your fraud department, because I'm sure they've got a fantastically long list of things that crop up in the business. Understand the nature of the fraud and see if the technology can be used to fix certain stuff there. The movement of payments, go talk to your payments people if they are there. If you are using payment providers, go see if there aren't any inefficiencies that this could fix for them. So yeah, there's a lot people can do. I would say take those general properties, anything from the brand engagement, fraud, curbing of fraud, seeing secondhand markets, and going to talk to those people in your company and see what they have to say, and presenting them with the technology and saying, hey, what are your thoughts? Because they'll know almost fairly quickly whether this works and where it will work and why it won't work. So I'd probably start there, and then I'd say to you, go look at what the leaders are doing. So because they're the ones taking it on the chin, right? OpenSea spent billions or millions, putting it all together, but they are prospering. So go see why they're successful. And then see if that success is something that you could benefit from in your business.
Yeah, and that probably leads well into a question from Ruben in our audience going, could NFTs replace transfer secretaries like Link and CompuShare? So that representation of ownership and bringing efficiency to the ownership and the transfer of ownership as represented by the digital representation of an asset. So I guess that would extend even into sort of property transfer and bond registration and other bits and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so fantastic question, and an absolutely brilliant highlight that I didn't speak about is there always, in any particular value chain, there seems to be somebody that asserts truth or verification and allows for this seamless transfer of stuff, and they take their pinch, and it's a business, right? So how do I know what you're doing is correct? How do I know that it's valid? The blockchain fixes that a lot. So if you're in the business, so like take the PSA, where they are the people, asserting that the quality, that this is actually what it says it is. I mean, those sorts of businesses ought to be worried. So the blockchain kind of like does all of that for you, at a fraction of the cost. So yes, I mean, those sorts of businesses will start to get affected. I mean, property transfers, go somewhere for 3 months and it takes so long and this and that. You can get the computers to automate almost all of that. So yeah, that's a very good insight and point to make. Silly things like there's a company called Wes that asserts that you actually went to WITS. And you see even in our current HR business, asserting that these credentials are legitimate, if University of the Wits, Vartus runs, and actually UJ have created blockchains now that say, hey, this person Carl did go to this university. It's legitimate. You don't have to pay some external party. So all these parties that sit there to verify the truth and to verify, that something is what they claim to say it is, yeah, the blockchain is definitely going to start chipping away at that. Almost all of that can be automated, yeah.
Well, you could look at how that could revolutionize IPOs in the future, where the IPO is actually issued by a company itself going, we're the originator of the shareholding within this company, and the representation of these shares is then converted into NFTs, and NFTs tokenized represent the ownership of the company.
Yeah, and that's actually what's been happening with a lot of the tokens. So when you see all these tokens on the internet, that's exactly what's happening. They take that, they run that, and they do all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's exactly another use case. So yeah, it's technology that has the power to change a lot of fundamental things, and so that's why it'll get there. It'll get there.
Well, a very current topic in the US at the moment is obviously voting and the authentication of voters. So now perhaps in the future, in true democracies, your vote is represented by a token, and your placement of that token in a particular pot represents your vote in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, extremely well said. I am absolutely fascinated about this idea of, so, you saw in the presentation that there was this digital address, and something that the internet has struggled to do is how do we know you are who you are? You're not an email address. How do we take you as a person and encapsulate this digitally? That's something that we still haven't kind of solved, right? And I think in the future, can your fingerprint be used to create a wallet address, right? And then I know when you do your votes, that you were the person who signed this, you were the person who cast the votes, and we can keep track of that vote everywhere. And there's no fraud in terms of, double counting or not counting votes and all of that sort of stuff. The less we have humans doing the counting, and the less, interaction points we have in the system, and the more the computers run the show, the better it is overall for the system. So it's a fantastic point to make with voting fraud, because that's a very real thing. I just think over there, digital identity is something that needs to be, how you are encapsulated digitally is something that is very intriguing, but it can solve some of the voting issues for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. And again, from Ruben, and I guess this goes to the separation between the representation of ownership and a digital asset itself, such as a picture, right? So you could encapsulate a picture in terms of the hashing, and it becomes part of a token, sure, and then that is the only representation. But Ruben's question was really, how might NFTs prevent replication of digital content? And I think the answer might be it doesn't, but it does represent the ownership of an original.
So it's a good question. We can duplicate anything, but what it'll come down to is which smart contract says it is legitimate, right? So, I mean, I can go take another smart contract, make that, give it a name, take the content, hash it, put it on there. But it's like, because what they do now is they'll say to take some of the popular stuff on OpenSea, the contract is verified, and they say actually this contract is by the people who are the creators. It's not a bogus person, because it's this chain, obviously, we said, okay, the content's verified by the smart contract, but who owns the smart contract? Is it really who these people are? There are some nice cool encryption mechanisms that can assert that, hey, this is the actual valid smart contract that is actually from this creator. And that's how it is sort of legitimate. So yeah, it just takes the fraud instead of it happening with the content stuff, because anybody can go create a smart contract, push that and claim, oh, look, behold, you own this. And I suspect some people will do that. But with all these marketplaces in place coming in and also verifying that those people are who they say they are, it's also a big deal. So it starts to curb fraud from that perspective, if that's what the question is trying to probe at. So always look to who signed this off. I can paint the Mona Lisa, but sadly, I'm not the original. If that helps, yeah.
It makes it interesting, that tie between the digital world and the physical world in terms of the assets that are like that have now a life in both spaces, and representation of the ownership in both spaces, basically physically in the real world and then digitally in terms of the NFT.
Yeah. And I think you'll find that sort of stuff playing into different stuff. So you saw that social media example. If Mark Zuckerberg does get the metaverse correct, it'll be a couple of years, but if he does, you can see all of a sudden how this physical world is, being represented digitally, both from all your items. I think one of the biggest hurdles to cross there will be you as a person, like how do we encapsulate you as a person digitally? But once those sorts of things start to get solved, I think it's blockchain technology will start picking up dramatically.
I guess it would be remiss not to kind of go, where are the pitfalls here? Where are the things that people really need to watch out for?
So sadly, as with any technology, there's always some scam artists trying to do stuff. And then you see, the crypto world is played with all these sorts of scams with the FTX, collapse and all that sort of stuff. So it's always there to be watchful. I think a healthy dose of common sense, which is, I guess, dangerous to say, but healthy dose of common sense. Go to reputable places, go to reputable things like OpenSea. Always be on the lookout for somebody trying to fish for your private key that relates to your wallet. But yeah, I don't think as we create things to curb certain things, humans will always try to be, because there's a business in it for the bad guys, right? So as we try and make things more fortified and try to curb fraud, somebody will always come up with something. And I think some good old-fashioned common sense, being a little bit wary about this and that, always goes a little bit further. But yeah, at this stage, just be wary of any sorts of scams, people posing to be other people. Always do stuff on something reputable like OpenSea. So if you are trading your NFTs, always go into something reputable. Go onto the FIFA website to make sure it is FIFA, and then from there you find to transact, right? So yeah, but unfortunately it's just the usual general scams to try and catch people. Always be on the lookout for that. I don't think as we die as humans that we'll ever be able. I think if we can solve digital identity nicely and find a way to verify that you are who you are talking to, like as a person, and all of that sort of stuff, once we get that right, I think it should fix a lot of things, especially now. So even if there is a transfer of value and we know where it went, we know who you are, right? Because this address encapsulates you and we know it was you. So even if you do steal something, prosecution efforts become easier, so on and so forth. But yeah, it is a little bit tricky at this stage. Yeah.
Well, that's always the case with, I guess, new technologies and finding where the most appropriate use cases are, and people will find the negative use cases and the holes in between, and we'll get better at it every day.
It's exactly that. Whenever there's a hole, you plug it, and somebody's always trying to chip away at it. It's the human nature. Where there's good, there's bad, and it just depends on how you plan to view something, pretty much.
And the excitement of leading and emerging technologies as led by Roberto in the Innovation Center. That takes us right on time for our hour today. Roberto, thank you so much for sharing with the audience. That certainly was comprehensive and very insightful in terms of NFTs. Thank you for that. To our audience, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you doing so. And please do join us again in the near future for our next sessions, which will be running again on the Thursday. And thank you again. Have a great day, everybody. And this recording will be posted soon. If you do have any additional questions, do reach out to us. Thank you.